specific point in time, I was so stressed to the point where I was getting heart palpitations every 30 seconds to a minute, and I thought I was gonna fucking die. Like I've never ever had a panic attack in in my life, and to so I had one in CLG actually when I first joined because I was transitioning and like yeah, I was by myself
Mhm.
technically, you know, like I was doing all this by myself. So but in complexity is when it really hit me hard, and I had to go to the hospital and get a was it EKG or ECG done
I have no idea.
just to make sure my fucking insides are okay, you know.
Yep.
So that's how stressed I was. I had to actually go to the hospital.
All right. Well, they say there is that saying that it's always darkest before the dawn. So this was probably one of the darker periods of your career. You know, departing from Renegades, which was supposed to be the bastion of ANZ Counter Strike, the top level of that, and now you're no longer on that team. So there was a little bit of a downtime period, not a major one, between sort of January and March before you joined CLG. But once you joined CLG, you know, it seems like things kind of started to turn around for Rickeh as an individual because you know there was this whole storyline of you being the first player from ANZ to play on a North American roster that wasn't Renegades. So you know you were sort of going out and forging your own kind of storyline and that kind of thing. So you know, you move over to CLG, and it seems like things have kind of gone pretty well for you. Was this, you know, in your mind maybe an upgrade over Renegades, or did you think that CLG at the time maybe was a little bit below Renegades?
I think it was a little bit below Renegades. At that specific time, uh, Renegades were in discussions on my behalf with a couple of different teams. One of them being Optic, which
Right.
I was so fucking excited. I'm like, oh my god, Optic. That was the team that won uh the E League. Was it E League season 2? That was the
Yeah.
lineup I
Was this
was
like
going to join.
Tarek? Was that the time Tarek was on Optic?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Tarek, Rush, Naf,
Hmm.
Stanislaw, and those guys. And they were in talks with that team for quite some time, and they weren't ready to make a roster change until after a specific tournament, which was like a couple of months away. And then CLG, and then they approached CLG and ended up doing a deal with them, which I'm not going to go into specifics of the deal, but like basically I ended up joining them, and yeah, I signed a contract with CLG because I wasn't ready to wait like 1 or 2 months just for a chance at maybe Optic approaching me again and saying, okay, now we want to do it.
Right.
So yeah, so CLG was the play.
So the pull of being the Optic sniper probably wasn't that high for you.
Yeah, at that time, like yeah, it was just like it was kind of like a pipe dream, you know.
Yeah.
Like
All
they
right.
did say they wanted to play with me, but they weren't ready at that specific time. And
Okay.
taking the chance a couple of months later on, like you never know what's going to happen. So
Sure. All right. Regardless of that, then obviously, I want to talk about this whole discussion about you being the first player to join an NA team. Like, was that like a big deal in your mind? Because I do remember it being a pretty big storyline. This was very shortly before ESL Pro League season 5, and I just remember like I was casting that season. I remember watching some of the North American casters, and everyone was talking about Rickeh, this guy on CLG, the ANZ player that wasn't playing on an ANZ team. So, did you feel like it was a big deal, or did everyone sort of blow it out of proportion a little bit?
no, it was blown out of proportion, just the right amount for me. It was perfect.
You got to be
Yeah,
the
like
star of the show, but it wasn't that crazy.
yeah, I really enjoyed like the kind of praise I was getting for like being the first guy to join the NA team and all that cool stuff. But at the end of the day, yeah, I was excited. I didn't know what CLG were able to accomplish until we actually started like getting a grip down on our play. As like I mean, after I joined the team, like blending into their play style, getting all the strats down pat. Like after we became nice and like well drilled, I saw the potential that this team had. So joining CLG at the beginning, I was like, okay, we're going to need to like do a couple of months of like good hard work to get to where Renegades was, but that wasn't the case. Like we were kind of pretty decent, like starting off straight away.
Okay. And what was your role like when you joined CLG? Because if I remember correctly, you weren't the primary AWPer on CLG, or maybe you were and then you weren't, or what was going on there?
Yeah, so this is where I kind of like just gave up my role completely as a main AWPer. I realized that if I was going to continue down this path and join big North American teams, like I'm going to have to give up roles. I'm going to have to give up stuff to a certain point. But the way I went about it was I will do anything anybody needs me to do as long as I'm in a fucking team, which is I think uh has affected me in a negative way towards the end of my career, like with complexity and stuff. But when CLG started with that, the roles that I was given, I was definitely comfortable with because they were happy with me picking up the second AWP whenever, and they were happy with me being a hybrid, lurky, like type of free role player. And FNS definitely activated me in that part. Like he knew my skill set while I was coming into that team, and he knew what he wanted to use me for, and it definitely worked.
Okay, so it's fair to say that at least when you joined CLG, you were pretty happy to be coming into this team.
Yes, I was happy. The only thing I can say about CLG is when I was uh, discussing my contract with them, I failed to mention. Basically, I asked for the exact same salary that I was getting on Renegades.
Mhm.
Actually, I asked for like $200 more or something because might as well try
Why
and move
not,
up
right?
while you're
Yeah,
going. Yeah. So I asked for that, and they agreed to it, but I didn't realize that it was before tax.
I see.
So so I was making a significant amount less in CLG than I was in Renegades. That's the only thing that kind of mentally affected me because of my own fuck up. I didn't read the contract properly. I didn't realize that that's what it was, and that kind of really pissed me off. But other than that, like I fucked up there, you know. So, but other than that, CLG was like it was a good time. There was other weird things like our player development manager who would come and wake us up at like 9:30 a.m. and tell us to make our beds and shit, and there was like mandatory gym and stuff which we quickly got rid of because we saw how it was affecting certain players. Um, and all that stuff kind of stopped like probably after a month.
Mm.
I joined the team. Like things kind of calmed down a little bit because they realized there is a couple of young guys in this team, but there's also some adults that need their space, and we were living in a gaming house and stuff. But in general, it was a really awesome experience with a really good organization.
So
So it's good.
I wonder if that's like maybe a relic of the League of Legends, sort of influence that CLG has had, because I know obviously I follow a little bit of League of Legends, and I did definitely back at that time follow a lot of League of Legends. I know that like there was this big push to sort of like professionalize things almost, and try to be a team, and do like real life things, because
Yeah, it was
gamers are
very
fucking gamers. So it
yeah
was like that kind of thing. It's like, let's go to the gym together, let's go outside together, let's actually
yeah.
do life things. So that's kind of where it probably came from.
It was very yeah, sportsman
Mm.
based type thing, and yeah, it definitely did come from the League of Legends because all the League of Legends guys were like 100%
They were on board
doing
with that.
that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the results that you have here with CLG. And it wasn't a long tenure with CLG. It was like maybe 9 months or so, maybe a little bit less than that. So there's not too many here, but the first one that you go to is the Starladder I Series. I know I always get these wrong. Starladder I League Series Season 3. Whatever the
Yeah,
fuck the name of that
was
is.
yep.
You get outplaced by Renegades. So like this is the main kind of storyline that I want to sort of touch on for this one. Was that like ever a thing that you sort of thought about? Did you always kind of want to beat Renegades or anything like that?
Ah, sorry, that wasn't the one in you. That was the qualifier
Mm.
beforehand, like one of the first qualifiers we played. Yeah, again, like joining into like CLG, I still wasn't like developed properly mentally. So going into CLG, my number one priority was fuck Renegades up. Like every
Okay.
single time, just beat these motherfuckers. Like show them. Like that was my mentality. So yeah, we lost to them the first time. Extremely depressing. Took me a day to recover, and then yeah, yeah. So like that's basically what that was. But then afterwards, we had some better results. So
Yeah, so you end up going on and beating them 2-0 in the semi-finals of this tournament as well, the qualifying tournament. And you make it through to the main event as well. You come second overall. You do come second to Immortals in the qualifier, but you make it to the main tournament. So this must be like, you must be riding on Cloud9 right at this point. Pardon the pun, obviously, not anything to do with the NA organization, but you must be feeling pretty good, right? You've left Renegades in your first tournament with CLG. You've basically knocked Renegades out of this qualifier, and you've gone on to then qualify for whatever this tournament was. So you must feel pretty good there.
yeah, it was great. It was exactly what I wanted, and we ended up doing it two more times, I think, and then because Renegades were going through a hard time at that point, they were going through a lot of different players trying to get somebody that fit the team. They had Jay-Z Walkings, they had Nexa, and they tried Nexa in-game leading. Um, Who else did they have?
They had
Do you
like
remember the
Nifty and
other?
Nexa at one point was what they sort
Yeah,
of settled
Nifty.
on at the start of
Yep.
2017. And then I think NAF came in when Nexa left.
Yeah, it's when NAF joined is when we started losing to them like
Mm.
consistently, and it still pisses me off to this day because CLG could have got NAF at that specific time when NAF was getting offers from Renegades and stuff. Like CLG didn't even bother to like approach him when um internal conversations were going on that will be an insane upgrade for us and it'll push us so much further.
Mm.
And what happened was I don't think CLG were happy to pay NAF what he wanted at the time, which
Right.
makes sense from an organization point of view. Like he was asking for a lot of money from what I remember, but Renegades were able to do that for him. CLG wasn't at the time, and that's when they started shitting on us when they got NAF. So
Okay, so then you go into ESL Pro League Season 5. This is your second Pro League season in North America, this time with CLG, and you come 8th overall in this season. So it's not quite as good of a performance as what you had in Renegades, but again, you do outperform the current Renegades roster. They came 9th this season. What did you think about, CLG this season of North America? Because it seems like maybe it might have been a little bit early on in the career of Rickeh on CLG to have some really, really good results. Was it like a meshing season? Were you still sort of finding your feet in this roster, or do you think you had already sort of gotten to that point and it was just a bad result per se?
I think individually I was pretty consistent starting off in CLG, but we were still finding our feet as a team. I think Ethan was still developing as a young player. Like towards the beginning of CLG, um, he was nowhere near as good as he is now. Obviously, like it's been years, but in general, like a couple of players were still developing and we were still meshing together as a team. So we still had like mixed results. And I think that's why it started off a little bit slow, but it didn't take long at all. For like within like 1 or 2 months that I was there, Ethan was already starting to break out and being an insane player for the team.
Okay, so this was the season, obviously, we talked about a little bit earlier where you were like, you were the guy, everyone was talking about Rickeh. So were you as an individual sort of feeling maybe a bit more pressure being in this CLG roster that because there was a lot more people talking about Rickeh instead of people talking about Renegades as a whole, did you feel like there was maybe more eyes on you, a bit more focus, any pressure or anything like that?
Um, No, I actually really enjoyed it. It fed into my ego a lot, but kind of in a good way at that specific point in my career. It fed into my ego in the way that it's like, all right, like, you know, people care about me more than what happened in my previous team, and the eyes are on me now to to outperform and maybe push Australian um, players a little bit further into the scene. And yeah, no, it definitely fed my ego, and I think at that point in time, it was a good thing for me.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point as well that you make because Renegades was struggling so much. It seemed like you were the best performer from ANZ, so there was like less of a focus on Renegades needs to perform to do a good thing for our region, and more of a at least if Renegades isn't doing too well, at
Yeah,
least Rickey's
there's
doing
one
okay.
Australian guy in CLG.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe won you a few fans at the time. Either way, you go into the Americas minor pretty quickly after ESL Pro League Season 5. And this is one where you do sort of just miss out on qualifying for the minor. You come third place. So Cloud9 and Immortals were the two that actually went to the major from this event. But you were really, really close. And you did pretty well in your group. You went 2-1 in your group in Group B, but it was when you had to play against Cloud9 in that lower bracket final that you lost 2-0. So was there ever an expectation that you should qualify for the major here, or did the team always sort of think that maybe Cloud9 and Immortals were better teams?
Yeah, the team, like we obviously knew that we could, but we expected to have a really rough time, specifically against Immortals. Fuck, I hated Immortals. Every single team we played Immortals in, they always fucking shit on us, dude. And Renegades, like every team I played in, it's something about Immortals that their playstyle always destroyed us. So we were always really scared going up against them. We weren't expecting to like beat them. We were expecting for it to be a close game at least and try. But if we did not make that minor, um, I don't think the expectations were set on us to make the minor. So, and again, the mentality in that team was very different with handling losses and stuff. So things were generally a little bit better with those losses.
Okay, so I don't want to touch too much on that because obviously it doesn't really lead anywhere. But I want to move into iBuypower Masters 2017 event that you played at. And the reason that I bring this up, despite the fact that you guys came 7th to 8th place, was, because normally I wouldn't want to talk about these kind of results. But it seems like the results with CLG were sort of very up and down, like you had some really good results, but then you also had some like really weird bad results. And it's kind of a strange one, right? Because, you now start to see teams like Renegades, for example, a team that you were fairly consistently beating, being able to outplace you and come second. Obviously, this is after the time where NAF has now joined Renegades. But what's the reason for CLG coming 7th to 8th in this tournament? Like, what are the implications of that?
I'd say towards the end of CLG, when they got the big sponsor, Madison Square Garden, um, it kind of there was kind of a few internal issues between the players and the organization in terms of, again, being promised something that we never received, especially once they got Madison Square Garden as a sponsor. Um, we were promised a lot and we got nothing of what we were promised. And I think that really, really affected a lot of the players in the team, including myself, because, when you're promised something and you're constantly told that you're going to get it, like on a weekly basis, like it's things just become a little bit shit internally. So
Mm.
I think that's what kind of led to us having extremely inconsistent results at any given time. It's like, again, I hate to use it as an excuse, because I think in general that's not exactly 100% the reason. It's because us as players were also inconsistent at the time, and it obviously showed that we needed something. Don't know exactly what it is at that time, but we needed something, and it was a little bit of both. It was people being unhappy with the organization at the time because of specific things, and yeah, and other stuff as well, like consistency.
Okay, so that was in November of 2017, and then, very quickly after this was when you were sort of moving out of CLG. So I want to talk about your last tournament with CLG, which is the ECS Season 4 North America. So, this was, I think at the time, a pretty big deal kind of a tournament, almost on the level maybe of ESL Pro League North America. I don't know what the sentiment was within North America, but I, from, here back in Australia, always sort of saw ESL as like, Pro League as the pinnacle, and then ECS was like, kind of almost as good, but not quite as good. So what was the thought process there for you? Like, was this as big of a deal as Pro League or no?
Yeah, ECS was pretty much as big as Pro League. I don't think there was anything exclusive at that point in time. You could play both,
Yeah.
but the most important things that were something that we looked to get big results on were ECS, EPL, and obviously the major circuit. Those were the three most important things at that time.
Yeah.
So ECS was on par with the EPL.
Yeah, it was like the main competitor rather for ESL Pro League.
Yeah.
Either way, you come 8th in this whole season, which again is a pretty disappointing result, I will say. I think for CLG, it's enough to get you into Season 5, but you don't really win too much out of it. It's definitely not a placing that makes you go through to the finals or anything like that. It's also your last event. Well, it's not really an event per se, but it's more of a tournament, right? It's more of a tournament that you play over a longer term. But it's the last thing that you really play with CLG. So was this where, you started to feel like, okay, maybe I'm not going to be in CLG all that much longer? Or what was the whole situation there?
So we actually had no idea that we were going to get removed as a team until like they came up to it, because the initial thing from them was, we got Madison Square Garden, now we can give you guys what you want, we can give you everything. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, okay, the CS team isn't profitable. We can't hold on to you guys. We'll keep the girls team though, because
Yeah.
they're profitable and marketable. But the guys team at that specific time, Madison Square Garden, didn't see that we were profitable, which again makes sense from business standpoint. They have to do what they had to do, is what it is. Like, I'm not going to say much about it, right? You can't. What can you say? It happens. We had no fucking idea that we were going to get removed, so that was a big shock to everybody. And then at that point, that's when everybody started, just going their separate ways, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll talk about that then. Before we do, though, I want to sort of just get your thoughts, like your overall sort of TLDR, like final thoughts of being with CLG. Was it a good time in your career, or?
It was, I'd say, yeah, it was a really good and happy time in my career. The only thing I didn't like was because I didn't negotiate my contract correctly.
Hmm.
Other than that, I had a great time in that team. Great people, great time.
All right, so this is then moving into a pretty weird part of your history where you don't really play on a team, but you're still sort of in North America. So between like November, December 2017 and June 2018, when you inevitably do join Rogue, I think all that you were sort of doing was playing in like the Face It stuff, and you weren't in any teams. You were maybe subbing for a few here. So was this kind of like a nervous sort of a time for you, because you wondered like, well, if I'm not in a team right now, like what am I going to do? Was it like, I guess, did you know what you were doing with your future, or were you just sort of going and taking it day by day sort of thing?
Yes, in regards to that was that's when I had met my girlfriend, and I decided to, like, we were already together for a specific amount of time, so I ended up not going back to Australia. Like, I came back to Australia for like 3 months or something, and then my girlfriend said, "Hey, why don't you just come move in with us in Toronto, and you can grind FPL here, and you can find a team." And I said, "Yeah, that's awesome. I get to live with my girlfriend. I get to play CS in North America again. I have 6 months to do so in Canada because that's how long you can stay there until you have to get the fuck out."
Hmm.
So basically, what happened was coming into like the 3 or 4 month period, I was grinding FPL just like every day, basically hoping for the best. I ended up stepping in one game for Splice, and they wanted to start playing with me, but then I got a little bit of a better offer in Rogue, and um, I think Semphis said a bunch of stuff of what happened with Splice. Like, I think I was actually going to join that team, but then the organization themselves ended up taking a step back in CS a little bit, and they changed a couple things. I don't exactly know um, like why it happened, but then I got approached by Hiko, and then he said, "Yeah, come try for us," and yeah, that was the next move for me.
Okay, well, let's talk about joining Rogue then, because this is a team that, I've heard you actually speak quite highly of. I've been tuning into a couple of your streams, and I know you do a little bit of the discussion around that. And that was largely part of the reason why I wanted to actually interview you like this, was because I don't really know too much about what happened with your career, like internally from a lot of the North
Yep.
America stuff. Like, it's quite hard to sort of get a read on that from here in Australia. So how did this all sort of come about? Like you said, you got approached by Hiko. So did he sort of just hit you up one day and be like, "Hey man, I know you're like a free agent, seen you grinding FPL. Like, what's your interest in joining our team, sort of thing?"
Yeah, so basically, Hiko reached out to me and said, "Look, I know you've been playing with Splice and you're thinking about joining Splice, but we'd like to, have a couple games with you, see what you think of the team, and if you want to, trial with us, they're basically interested to get me." And I saw the players in Rogue. Um, I thought that Rogue was just in general a better team than Splice at the time, so I decided to trial with them, and yeah, like things went well from the get go. They were happy with how I was playing and how I meshed into the team, so I decided just to go with them.
Okay, so I know you've spoken quite highly of Rogue in the past on your stream and stuff like that. I seem to recall you saying something like this was your favorite team to play in, apart from the current team that you're in right now, which is obviously Order. So, what were your expectations maybe of joining Rogue? Did you know any of those players prior to this point or anything like that, or did that sort of all come a little bit later on?
I got to know them as I was in that team. All those players, yeah, I had never played with, but in general, I just really enjoyed the environment there from the get go. So I was happy, like throughout that whole team.
Okay, so you join Rogue then, and again, this was one of those teams where you just didn't seem to stick around for all that long. It's quite a tumultuous era of your career this time, where you were in North America. But I guess at the time, North American Counter-Strike was quite volatile regardless. Either way, so you play in Dreamhack Open Austin. This was the first tournament that you had with the team. You got a second place there, and it seems to be a pretty good result. So what are your initial thoughts after now sort of having played a tournament with that team?
Um, yeah, so I think just initial thoughts on the team in general, or
Yeah, just in general, and how your results are, how you're maybe meshing with the team. Are you feeling comfortable and that kind of thing?
yeah, so yeah, things were going extremely well until up to the point where Cadian took the offer to go back to his hometown and play with North. And again, extremely understandable, but I think it really hit us kind of hard because we were on such a good trajectory coming out of the
Mm.
major, we didn't make it into the top 16, but our first couple tournaments with Rogue were extremely good. I had a couple incentives in my contract that boosted my salary because of that. So everything was fucking so good. We managed to get stickers with the organization, and then yeah, Cadian took the offer to North, and that's when things went a little bit downhill for the team.
Okay, yeah. So maybe we should just fast forward then a little bit to some of these results just before Cadian leaves. We'll talk, I think, a little bit more about the major itself. So you play in the minor, you come second behind Complexity. Not a big deal, realistically speaking. You've made it to the major. You've qualified. It's been a long time, really, since you were at a major because, you missed out on a couple here and there, and you obviously being able to make it all the way to the major as opposed to like the major qualifier. This must be sort of a big thing for you, to be able to get back to that level, right?
Yeah, it was insane. Like it was also extremely emotional. Like once we qualified for that, we realized all the hard work we put in. It's working. We're on an upwards trajectory,
Mm.
and things were going really well. Excuse me. Towards like yeah, the reason why I say I I liked that team so much was because of the guys that were in that team. We're all just a bunch of fucking trolls. Like we had such a good time, and it was also the environment that I was in because um, Rogue catered to everything that a kind of an older player needs in order to be comfortable in a team environment. So I was done with the gaming house after CLG. Like, don't get me wrong, a gaming house is great, but I at that point in my life, I would rather have a apartment to myself, be able to also live with my girlfriend, and to be as comfortable as possible, which is what they facilitated. So I ended up, I started playing with Rogue in Toronto, and then once my time uh, ran up ran out in Canada, I ended up getting my visa, and then I moved to Las Vegas. Which for me, like, I enjoy poker, I enjoy a bit of gambling. It was fucking
Mm.
perfect. Living in Vegas, living the fucking fast life, playing CS, 10 minutes away from the strip. Like everything was just so good, and the environment with those guys, like it was always good times. Win or lose, like we were always really good to each other in general.
I actually should have asked you this a little bit earlier, but was there sort of a sense of relief maybe when you did actually join Rogue that you had been able to find a team? Because, I mean, I guess, it's natural to worry maybe that you might not find a team after being, teamless after leaving CLG. So what was the thought process there? Did you think that like maybe that would be your last stint in North America? Was there ever a thought that after this 6 months in Canada, if I haven't got a team, I have to come back to Australia?
I think because of my results as an individual in CLG and Renegades, I was always confident that I was able to find a team. I just didn't know how long it was going to take, or if my time was going to run out before I did
Hmm.
find a team. That wasn't playing in MDL. That was already in Pro League. That was already kind of established. So I was worried, but at the same time, I always thought to myself that it's going to happen eventually. You're playing good enough. Your individual skill right now is really good, so it is going to happen. So I had that in the back of my head constantly
Okay.
as all that was happening.
So we're pretty confident that you were going to get into a team.
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll jump back again onto this Rogue discussion, which is kind of where we got up to. Obviously, you spoke about the fact that Cadian then departed the roster after the major. You had pretty good results at the major, so I think it's fair to assume that you would have expected the team to stay together, but not what happened. So you bring MSL on for ESL Pro League Season 8. You get a 10th place result, which is actually quite poor, I think, in the context of what the team results were prior to that. And things seem to be maybe going on a little bit of a downward trend maybe for Rogue. And you sort of have mentioned the fact that you thought Cadian obviously was a big part of the team, but was there a lot more going on, or was it just because these roster changes had happened and maybe the team hadn't gelled yet or anything like that?
Yeah, there was a little bit more than that. Like yeah, Katie and leaving definitely like affected us, but not to the point where we're like, oh, we don't want to play as a team anymore. Like we still want to stick together with the four players, and we initially tried out Crystal for a brief stint. He came and actually moved um, in one of the apartments in Vegas for like a couple of months, and his in-game leading style and individual performance at that time wasn't something that we like kind of were looking for. So unfortunately, we parted ways with him. Great guy, by the way, like really good guy, mentality and everything, but he just wasn't the kind of in-game leader that we were looking for. So we were kind of at a point where we're like, fuck, we're kind of screwed here. Like we don't really know what's going on. And then we ended up getting MSL, which we thought that was going to be a big like improvement to get us back to where we were. But then yeah, so that's what happened. MSL ended up joining, and then yeah, from then on the results weren't nowhere near as good as what we expected towards the end of Rogue.
Well, towards your the end of your stint in Rogue, you played in Dreamhack Open Atlanta 2018. I think this was the last event that you played with the team, and you had a pretty good result at Dreamhack Open Austin where you came second place. But this Atlanta event had some better teams there. There was like Vitality, Luminosity, and that kind of thing at this event, and you come fifth and sixth, so you don't manage to get a whole lot done at this event. Again, I have to ask the question, like, was there any knowledge maybe that you were departing the team at this point? Was there a discussion around that? Or did it sort of feel like the team was maybe on a downward trajectory to you at the time? Because, in hindsight, it's easy to say yes, but because we know that in 2019, the team sort of disbanded. But, what was the team mentality really at this point in your career?
I think the mentality was always good, even when MSL joined. I think just when he joined that, so when Cadian left, I picked up the main AWP role again, and I was even happy. I'm like, oh fuck yeah, I get my shit back. Like, I can do what I was doing for Renegades and stuff like that. So I transitioned back into main AWP for like maybe 2 to 3 weeks, and then throughout the time that Crystal was in the team, so maybe a month to 2 months, I think. But then MSL joined, and he's a very he's insanely good in-game leader, obviously, but he basically, from what I heard from the team, is that he did not um, see really use for me in the team because of the roles that I played. So, and on top of that, in order for him to join Rogue, he wanted to pick up the main AWP and IGL, right? Which is something that I said, all right, cool. Like, I'll go back to hybrid second AWPing. But then when he joined the team, I didn't realize that he does not want a second AWPer at all, and it put me into he put me basically into positions that like I had to get used to,
Mm.
and I don't think I was good enough. Like I just wasn't good enough in like getting used to being part of the pack again and being in those sort of entry positions. And what happened was towards the end of that stint, I started becoming really unhappy with my roles, and I wasn't happy with the way that like I was kind of playing in that team at the same time. And then I ended up approaching Complexity because I'd always been friends with Warden and Def. Every time that we went to events, I'd chill with them and a couple of other players as well. So we had a good relationship beforehand. So I'd approach them and I said, look, towards the end of my contract when it's finishing, like if you guys are ever looking to like make a replacement, I'd be interested in playing, etc. And then what happened was um, the guys in Rogue, MSL, when MSL joined, I found out like later on, way after when I was in Complexity, that he actually wanted to get rid of me anyway. So I was going to be kicked if I didn't step out of my comfort zone and actually approach Complexity beforehand.
Mm.
So it was actually like yeah, it kind of worked out for me in the sense that I managed to join the team before I got kicked anyway. And the guys in Rogue were saying, look, we had no issue with you before MSL joined, but obviously he doesn't really have a use for you. He doesn't want to play with you either. So, um, yeah, like they were obviously going to agree with what he said because he's the in-game leader. He came over, he took over the team,
Mm.
and what he says goes. So, yeah, I was going to get removed anyway. So that's why, yeah, that's what happened.
Okay, so then you go on to join Complexity, which seems like a pretty good move at the time. We know in hindsight things went kind of sour towards the end with Complexity, which we'll get to as well. But how did you sort of think about this team when you were joining? You said you were mates with a couple of the players there, so you must have been pretty ecstatic, I guess, to be joining this roster.
Yeah, I was. I think it was a really good choice to make career-wise because they had the legend spot also in the major. So moving forward, I know I'd be playing in a couple of really, really important events. Would be in the legends in the major. Like
Hmm.
that's pretty much all that it took for me to be like, all right, if you guys want me, um, not having a good time here anymore, you know, let's do it. So that's basically what happened towards the beginning of it.
Okay, and I think I saw in an interview maybe or like an announcement for the roster or something like that for this Complexity roster that what you said was that you were really excited to play with these kinds of players because these were people that you'd been watching since, you'd been going through your career. So was there anything to do with that? Like, I assume you're probably referring to maybe like Nothing and Shazam at the time because these were the more tenured players from North America at that point in NA's history. Like, were you quite excited to play with these sort of bigger figures from the North American region?
Yeah, not to say that Rogue like didn't have some big names, like you have your
Hiko and
Hiko,
stuff. Yeah.
Katie,
Mm.
but in general, like yeah, I'd always knew that like Stanislaw was an insane in-game leader, and because of their performance at the previous events and how they were like started to play insane. Like I think it was actually only the major that had kind of a good placing, but because of that result and seeing what they were achieving afterwards a little bit is what made me extremely excited to join them. I
Mm.
did not know when I joined them that they were going to be replacing Yay and Android, and there was a lot of controversy about that because the community at that point was questioning why those players were removed in regards to like why didn't they get rid of like Def, for example, where he was sort of underperforming at that specific time, and there was a kind of questions around it because is me and nothing an upgrade for Android and Yay? Personally, if you ask me, I don't think so.
Hmm.
So it really, I don't think it made the team better. But at that time, like decisions were made, and that's just what happened.
Okay, and then the final sort of question that's I think quite important in the context of what happened later within Complexity was what was the community sentiment around you as an individual at the time just after Rogue and as you joined Complexity? Because if you remember again when you were in CLG, you were like God's gift to North American Counter-Strike from the Australian CS scene, and then you seem to be still pretty respectable,
Maintained it on Rogue
obviously. Yeah, you
kind
maintained
of.
it on
Yep.
Rogue. So I've gotten written down in my notes here. Community sentiment is that Rickeh is poggers. I haven't really got a better way of sort of saying it. But was
Fair
that
enough.
like true? Like, did people really were people really excited to sort of see you on Complexity, and people sort of still liked? I guess still liked you at the time, from at least from North America, right? I'm not talking about AU because we know that
Yep.
AU, they still have quite a lot of respect for you. But I'm more so talking about the North American contingent.
Yeah, no, towards the beginning it was all hype. It was like, that's in terms of an upgraded roster, I don't know if people were actually on board with that. But in general, like I still had, the community backing behind me. And then it's within like 2 and 3 months of joining that team, this is where I go back to saying I gave up so many roles and so many things that I was comfortable with, where it just affected me not only mentally, but like my performance just spiraled out of control in towards the beginning of Complexity, and I went from within literally a 3 month period of being this guy's going to be like in one of the top American teams one day, like super consistent player, to this guy's trash. Like, what is he? And
Hmm.
again, like I've never been on that side of a community where they actually just think you're absolutely pathetic or washed up and stuff, and it really really got to me.
Yeah.
And hindsight's a bitch, but these are the kinds of things that happen if you let the community get to you in that way.
Yeah.
So it was my first experience on the negative end of it, and I was like, fuck, like
Okay.
I kind of screwed myself.
So that is definitely something that I want to talk about because I think it's an issue that a lot of people will deal with in their career in esports, whether you're a player, casters as well. I've had that same sort of a sentiment as well. It's not a good feeling. But before we get there, I think we need to add a little bit of the context as to how this sort of all came about because you come into this roster, everyone thinks you're fucking sick at the time. And then, if you go back and look at your HLTV results and like the ratings and that kind of thing, I think that's a good indication, like a visual representation of what actually happened to Rickeh as a player coming into this Complexity roster. Because prior to that point, there was a lot of series, a lot of events where you were just quite far above a 1.0 rating. You were sitting at like 1.1, 1.2 kind of average, something like that when you're in Renegades and CLG and Rogue and that sort of thing. But as soon as you come into this Complexity roster, and I don't know really exactly what the reason is, but based on your twitlonger, it seems like there was a lot of role changes for you in this Complexity roster, and you maybe were a little bit out of your comfort zone. But you went down to like some pretty bad like performances individually. At least there was a lot more red on your stats page than what there was prior to that. So let's talk about the first event here that you play, which is the iBuypower Masters 4. And the second event as well, which is the E-League CSGO Invitation. Now, there's not that many maps here. There's only 6 maps out of these 2 tournaments. But for both of these tournaments, you sat at like less than a 0.7 rating. So was this a situation where you just didn't like mesh very well with the new role, or how you sort of didn't come into the team as comfortably as you thought that you might?
Yeah, to be completely honest, I had no fucking idea what I was doing in these roles. Like I was just so lost, and I didn't. And I think one of the the big things that made it even worse for me is that I didn't really embrace the roles as much as I did in other teams. In Complexity, it was completely new to what I'd ever done before, and I had a I had a really good conversation with Nothing at one of those tournaments. Actually, I think it was after iBuypower Masters, because I don't know if you remember that, but that tournament was the biggest shit show of the year at that specific time because of all the issues that happened around it.
Mm.
Um, I won't go into too much detail about what happened with the issues, but like in general, I just wasn't comfortable, but I also wasn't accepting the fact that look, these are your roles now. You just have to get good at those roles. Other like there's not that's it. There's
Yeah.
nothing you can do about it. You can maybe ask to change a couple positions, and they were happy to do that to like a little bit later on. But I left it for too long to say, look, I'm not comfortable here. I thought I could do what I did in CLG, was just join the team and take all the roles and be good at it. But at the end of the day, like um, yeah, that just didn't happen at that time.
Okay, so before we again continue too much further on that train of thought, there's a couple more sort of relevant results that I think we should probably talk about first. The first being the Katowice major that you attended. This was the first major that you played with Complexity of the two that you played there. And you got a 12th to 14th place, which, like, in reality is actually a pretty good result at a major. I think that's your best performance as an individual at a major. So, did you sort of feel like maybe you had achieved something that you hadn't been able to do on other teams? Was the sentiment within the team quite positive at this result, or were they maybe expecting more?
I think Complexity as an organization were expecting a little bit more because they had gotten the Legends spot beforehand, and we dropped out of Legends in that tournament to
Mm.
Challengers. What we did manage to do was beat NRG at the time, who were showing to be a much better team than us, and we luckily went 1-3 in the groups, which maintained our spot into the next major. So we only needed to win one best of three to get to instantly go into the next major. So yes, Complexity was happy with that, but as a team, we weren't happy because we wanted to maintain legend status.
Okay.
So yeah,
But for you, was there any sort of sense of accomplishment maybe, or did you just go along with the team in that you were probably disappointed with that result?
I think I was disappointed as well. I think I was at a point in my career where I think we could have definitely done a lot better. But based on what was happening with me mentally and the results, we definitely weren't happy with the result.
Okay, so a pretty quick brief chat about Katowice Major, because it's not a huge deal at that point in time. But I want to have a much bigger discussion here about the Starladder Berlin Major, because this is where it seems like a lot of the things kind of come to a head with Rickeh and Complexity and all of the issues and stuff. So to start off with, like before we get into any of that, there was an interview that Shazam did before the major where he said, so far, this boot camp has been the most productive one I've had with Complexity. So just from reading that one quote, it seems to me like the mentality within the team was actually quite positive going into the Starladder Berlin Major, or was that just a front maybe for the community?
I think Shaz actually genuinely felt like that, but in my personal opinion, like I feel like it wasn't like that at all. It was our 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 practice results were maybe because of how things were going down, and like I said, like we were focusing a lot more on the negatives. It felt a lot worse than it was. And going into the major, I personally I didn't feel that way, but I didn't tell the guys like anything of that sort until after everything with the major was finished.
Okay.
Um, so yeah,
So what happened at the major was that you came 20 to 22nd place, which is obviously not very good at all. And I guess from the community expectation, this was well below what people expected Complexity to be able to achieve. HLTV even went in to describe this as their disastrous campaign at the Starladder Berlin Major. So it was even described as disastrous. I want to know, like, why was it so disastrous? And I guess the results obviously speak for themselves, but because there was this whole sort of shitstorm that happened afterwards, was there like internal issues during the major with the team?
um, no, at that time there was not really many internal issues at all. If I don't think there was really any. In general, Complexity had taken a big chance on getting Obo signed, and he was only like 2-3 months into the team. So I think everybody like blew it up out of proportion in the way that like unrealistic expectations for this team. So I think given more time, I think we definitely would have been like really good. But in general, I don't think we were given anywhere near enough time, not only to um, like get used to each other and get used to all the new roles, like Def transitioning into an IGL, um, Obo coming in, figuring out how to use him properly, figuring out how to like me figuring out how to get some roles back and actually be able to cause some damage in a team again. It was messy in that part. Internally, I would say that things were pretty good throughout the whole complexity stint and until the end. After Stanislaw left, things actually spiraled a little bit out of control in terms of like, yeah, what's going on? Are we taking a chance on Obo? Are we already getting an established player? Like people were thinking about getting Ye back because at that point everybody thought Ye like didn't deserve to get kicked. Android didn't deserve to get kicked. Like, why did they make an upgrade where it didn't really make sense to? And I kind of agreed with that, but it's yeah, that's what happened.
Okay. One of the results that I do want to sort of specifically touch on at that major was the game against Greyhound, which is obviously, you know, another team from the ANZ region. So was there ever any impact for you, like that this result might have affected you more so than some of the other ones because you were losing to other ANZ teams, or did you not really see it that way?
No, that game killed me. That game actually killed everything that I has. Like I was happy going into that tournament for the most part. Um, Even though like boot camp was very like strenuous and just like we were focusing again. I'll say this a lot. We were focusing a lot on the negatives. Where in hindsight, that's not what you need to do in order to like go in confident into a tournament. Um, yeah, when Stanislaw left, yeah. Sorry, what was the question again? Sorry, I missed.
About Greyhound, whether or not, you know, you felt
Greyhound,
more affected
yes.
by that.
Yeah, no, that fucking destroyed me. I thought that we would have no issue against them. I didn't realize that they were already as good as that. So we kind of definitely underestimated them, but we also underperformed to like I don't think even though that they were or on the upscale as a team, Greyhound, there's no way we should have lost to them. Like I in my personal opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously you're a team in North America and you have a lot more resources than Greyhound did at the time.
Yep.
So you go out of this major and you don't have the performance that you probably wanted to as a team. Where things get a little bit worse, though, is Jason Lake, obviously the CEO of Complexity, made the juggernaut tweet right after this major. And I think this was like before you guys had even left the event or something like that. You had just lost your game, which knocked you out. And he said, basically, like, you can go back and look at the tweet. It's pretty easy to find. But the TLDR was like, I love our players as individuals, but these results won't be tolerated. So what did you immediately think of that tweet?
I think after that happened, obviously Jason knows like he shouldn't have made that tweet, but at the same time, if you ask him again, he'll probably say he would have just worded it a little bit differently because that put us in a position where we're kind of in limbo, not knowing who's going to get removed, who's staying, what's going to happen with the team, and it got to a point where we're just sitting in the apartments for like over a month, still getting paid, mind you, but like we're sitting in the apartments not knowing what's going to happen with our future, with our career as individuals or the team. So it got worse and worse to the point where towards the end of that, like I was so unbelievably stressed out because first of all, I didn't have anybody with me at that time. My girlfriend had to go back to Toronto because she can't stay in US for things like 3 months, 3 months at a time and stuff like that. So I was by myself. I was in a really bad mental state, and it got to the point where I was so unbelievably stressed. Not because of the Jason Lake tweet or because of what stuff happened at the major. I was even before that, like as an individual, I was extremely stressed because of how bad we were playing, like just in general. And like again, hindsight's a bitch, and I had to approach it in definitely a different way. But at that specific point in time, I was so stressed to the point where I was getting heart palpitations every 30 seconds to a minute, and I thought I was gonna fucking die. Like I've never ever had a panic attack in in my life, and to so I had one in CLG actually when I first joined because I was transitioning and I was by myself
Mm-hmm.
technically, you know, like I was doing all this by myself. So, but in complexity is when it really hit me hard, and I had to go to the hospital and get a was it EKG or ECG done
I have no idea.
just to make sure my fucking insides are okay, you know?
Yep.
So that's how stressed I was. I had to actually go to the hospital. And I think it just, it, in my own mind, it blew up to a point where it wasn't as bad as I made it seem, but because of the circumstances around myself is why shit went down so bad.
So did you like mentally think that maybe you were on the chopping block? Like if you see that tweet, do you think you obviously think someone's getting removed? Do you immediately think actually that could be me?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because of the results that I had in Complexity, I thought I was 100% out of it. Um, I, I I thought there was a slight chance of me staying and being able to maybe because Shaz and Def had been in the team for so long, and me, Sick, and Obo were still kind of new to the team, and we hadn't really been given a chance. I thought that there would have been a chance that maybe um, they would have removed maybe Shaz and Def and put me into the main AWP role, which is what I kind of asked for. But at that
Mm.
point, I was so far gone where I basically went up to Jason Lake and I said, yeah, this is how it is in the team at the moment. Like Def, like props to Def for picking up the in-game leader role, because I think he was definitely forced into that role. And when an organization makes roster moves that the team doesn't necessarily agree with, but kind of has to go with it, it affects you internally, but also you have to be able to accept it, because there's no reason for it to affect you. You have to think past that. You have to be able to work with new players. You have to be able to work with what you're given, right? So, um, yeah. So what was I
I think we were talking about whether or not you thought you were going to be removed from the roster.
Oh yeah. So yeah, 100%. I thought if I don't and that then that comes to the twitlonger with me absolutely losing my mind and just
Mm.
blurting on when everybody said just relax, fucking let everything be handled. But I was such in a bad mental state because of how the community saw me now. Like apparently I'm washed up, I'm trash, I'm no good anymore. All happened within a 3 month span of joining this team, and
Mm.
it was just so bad where I felt like I had to say something when in reality I shouldn't have said anything at all.
Okay, so let's just break that down a little bit more then, because obviously there's quite a lot to go through with that twitlonger and all of the fallout from it. You know, we obviously know you go on to then be removed from Complexity. So that's where this has all been leading up to. So you're removed from Complexity. And the first question that I actually want to ask you about this was, and I think I already know the answer based on the discussion that we've had, but were you actually happy in Complexity?
Um, Overall, when Stanislaw was in the team, I was happy. I was picking up a couple of my roles back. Stanislaw was happy with me. He said, "Look, and not only him, like Warden and all the guys from Complexity, like they came to me and they said, "Look, we appreciate what you're doing. We appreciate you taking up all this stuff. Like, this is something that we really need from some of our players to take the initiative, get in there as an entry fragger, do the roles that people don't want. We appreciate that." And like it was great. Like I said, yeah, like thank you, like that really helps me and stuff. But performance wise, it wasn't good for me as individual. But it it depends. Like if your team is winning games, it doesn't matter if you're playing shit, But if your team is consistently losing games that you shouldn't, and just losing in general, and on top of that you're playing really bad, that's when it starts getting to your head a little bit that maybe you're not good enough anymore. Like maybe something's wrong. Like what exactly is wrong,
Yep. It's like, I don't know, for me, obviously, I've never been a professional player or anything like that, but I play a lot of like competitive, like ranked games and that kind of thing. And I always wonder, like, once you start to hit a barrier where you're like, do I deserve to go to the next level, or am I just getting carried, or like, am I really that good? Do I deserve to be here? I wonder if it's like, is it that kind of mentality?
Yeah, it's a little bit of that. And yeah, the most important thing was like when Stanislaw left, it reset us completely. Like we thought we were at least we were gonna. Jordan was only filling in like kind of part time, right? We wanted to get nothing as like a full time player, but he had other things going for him at the time, so he didn't want to continue, which is again fair enough. So that him and Stanislaw leaving like completely reset us, and then um after Stanislaw left is where I think it really kind of spiraled out of control.
Hmm. Okay, so let's go through this twitlonger a little bit, because this obviously caused a massive shitstorm, and there's a fair bit to go through here. It's going to be a fun one, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Now,
this is
HLTV even like wrote an article about you departing the roster, and they cited your twitlonger. I can't remember. I did read through the twitlonger just before we made this interview. I did this interview, but I don't recall reading this exact quote. But this is what it said in the HLTV article. So you can tell me if this is an incorrect quote, but it does say, quote unquote, team did not utilize people's strengths. So was that something that you wrote, or was that just the implication that was put into the twitlonger or taken from the twitlonger, or was that what you genuinely felt, that they didn't utilize? I mean, theoretically, in this discussion, it would probably be your strengths, but was it just the people's strengths in general?
I don't think they utilized our strengths in the way me, Obo, and Sick in that team. Like, I think it was a little bit skewed, but at the same time, um, I don't know if Def wanted to become the in-game leader. I think he was forced into that position, and it showed, in my personal opinion, that he obviously wasn't ready to lead a team in the sort of way that needed to be. But again, I don't blame him for anything that happened. It was just the way that it all went down, and we were just it just felt like a never-ending limbo where we've gone from having Stanislaw and nothing to practicing extremely hard for like 3-4 months solid, and having a good foundation and knowing what the fuck we're doing to not knowing what the fuck we're doing anymore again. And because of that, that's why I personally think that we weren't utilized properly. But at the same time, if somebody comes in as an in-game leader and has a plan for the team and has a certain strategy and a way he wants to go about things, every single player in that team needs to subscribe to that mentality. You know, you need to be, as a unit, you need to subscribe to what we're doing as a team. And towards the end of that, I stopped feeling that way. I stopped thinking like, yeah, we need to do what he's saying and the way that Complexity want to run the team and stuff. But I just thought that it just didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense.
Okay.
The same reason why replacing Yay and Android and get me and nothing didn't make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this is sort of something that you alluded to as well in that twitlonger, and this is a direct quote from the twitlonger of this, I'm sure, because people continue to bring this up. You know, this was one of the things that really seemed to get the community offside about you, was that when you wanted to buy the AWP, you know, 90% of the time, apparently, you were told, no, please don't buy the AWP, we haven't cracked it or whatever, and then you basically went on to say that you would just not listen and buy it anyway. So people were, they got this, like, they really got pissed off about this. And
imagine if I didn't say that one thing.
Exactly. So this is the whole discussion. It's like people started calling you a narcissist and stuff like this. Like, we're basically saying like that you think you're better than you really are. I think there was something like where you said something like, you know, you thought you could do damage or something, and people were like, what the fuck? He can't do damage. He's a shit player, and that kind of thing. So, I mean, I say all of this stuff to give the context of what the community sentiment was of that twitlonger. It was very negative at the time. So I want to ask, like, do you regret writing that twitlonger? Or maybe do you regret how you wrote that twitlonger?
I regret writing it in general. Like, even if I did get removed and I said nothing, I just don't think it was worth it whatsoever, because like I got removed so much quicker because of it. Like, I could have made like another fucking $20,000 just sitting on my ass doing nothing if I didn't write anything, because that's how long it took for them to replace the other guys also. So yes, I 100% regret it. Not because of the money, obviously, but also it was just extremely unnecessary. And like at the time, like, of course I ran it past a couple of people and said, look, this is what I'm going to say. What do you think? And obviously everyone said, do it, look, fucking do it.
Yeah, they're fucking doing you dirty.
Yeah, and like they gave me the confidence to post it and everything. But look, at the end of the day, internal issues like that, especially while you're still signed on a contract, like nobody needs to hear that shit. It's not exactly like it's just not necessary. So
what did you think about people calling you a narcissist? Do you think you're a narcissist? Do you think you have a big ego?
I mean, I think back in the day, yeah, 100%. But now towards the beginning of Complexity, this was only after Def transitioned into in-game leader, and all the roles were skewed and everything was back towards a mess. Like when Stanislaw was part of the team, like there was none of this. Like everything was 100% sweet. Everybody knew what they were doing, what was happening, right? It was only towards the end where I was by myself, like in an apartment, stuck in my own head, like in limbo, especially after that major, is where it really blew out of control, and I basically lost my mind. Like I basically lost my fucking mind, and I took like half a day to write that shit and make sure that I didn't say anything stupid. But then I realized as soon as you put something in there that you down talk yourself, that's what everybody's going to focus on. So yeah, like
yeah, and I think one thing that I've recognized as well from obviously being a public figure doing commentary and stuff is that, you know, you can say something and intend it to come across one way, but people will often always take it the wrong way. They'll take it the way that can create the most drama. You know, like if I say, let's say, for example, I'm casting one of your games. I'm saying, Rickeh's having a bad game here. You might be like 10 and 20 or whatever. People are going to be like, this caster's shitting on Rickeh. He's saying Rickeh's a bad player. It's like, it's not
you guys
really.
get it as well.
Yeah, it's not really what I'm saying. I'm just saying he's not performing to the level that he normally does, and that's part of the reason. I don't know, whatever. So people just take it the wrong way a lot of the time. So do you think that maybe people sort of latched on to the wrong parts of that twitlonger and kind of dove into the wrong things a little bit?
Yeah, I think it was more so the community that latched onto the negative bits. I think all the players that I've ever played with kind of quickly realized, they're like, wait, what's wrong with Rickeh? He's never really been like this. Like, aside from Renegades and my mentality in Renegades, like CLG Rogue and the start of Complexity, everybody's like, what the fuck's wrong with Rickeh? We didn't know he's like in such a bad mental state. Like, what's going on here? And like I said before, when they said they didn't want me to AWP, again, that's when Def comes into the IGL position and he wants things done a specific way. You need to just listen to it. You can't just go out of your way and be like, nah, fucking, this is gonna make me, Oboe, and Hunter play shit. Like, we just try and do something different. So, like, you can give your opinions, but if he wants a certain way that things are done, you just need to subscribe to it. Otherwise, it'll never work.
Okay.
So
let's talk then a little bit about how this sort of impacted you as a person, because you've obviously already given me a pretty good idea and understanding of what this community sort of sentiment really did to you. But I want to get an idea of, like, you know, at that point where the community sentiment really shifted away from you being, you know, a really sick, really amazing player, that kind of thing, to being like public enemy #1 for North America. How did this sort of impact you as an individual? Did you really like start to struggle with your mindset, your mentality, and what is it like basically being on the receiving end of that bandwagon shift? Because I've had some Reddit threads and stuff about my casting and that sort of thing, so I kind of understand, but I've never been like constantly shit on by everyone. There's always been someone that's like, oh, actually, I don't mind these guys. But I feel like I went back and looked at the twitlonger tweet, and it just seems like every reply that you got was someone basically shitting on you. So what was that like?
I think it was more because from being a player that was kind of like, I think I was a little bit overrated also on top of that, but being a player that was like, Rickeh should join Liquid, Rickeh should join Optic, blah, 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 all this stuff, to Rickeh is absolutely pathetic. Like, why is he still here? It affected me in a way that, again, hindsight's a bitch. You have to completely brush it off as a professional, and especially for how long I've been a professional in North America, there's no way you should let something like that affect you. But there's also external things that happen, whether it be in your everyday life or, you know, for me personally, it's because I felt just so alone and such in a limbo place and not knowing where this team's going and what's happening. And not only that, it's just a bunch of different things that all end up piling into one, and it all hit me so fast that I just lost my mind.
You sort of
So
broke down in a way, or like?
Yeah, I just broke down, dude. I just completely broke down. And even Jason Lake said in I think he was doing an interview, or he was on a podcast with Richard Lewis, and he said, look, he said, there's no hard feelings on Rick. I think he kind of needed a break. He needed to fucking get his mind back together and stuff. And obviously it was showing towards the end. He didn't mention that I went to hospital or anything, but it's like, it's not necessary to mention. The only reason I'm mentioning that is to give people like kind of an insight of what I was going through personally and how serious it actually was. And that's basically it. But he said, you know, Rick needed a break, and it obviously showed.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, he knows that I didn't mean to do that to him and Complexity, because they treated me so well, man, and they had everything that a player needs to be a good player.
I think it's important context as well for, you know, I feel like I'm sort of like this, whatever I say right now is probably going to fall on deaf ears, because the kind of people that are going to go kind of ham on a player or something like that are probably not the kind of people that are going to get 2.5 hours into a podcast from that one player. But I think it's important for people to know that, like, even though you may just be a name in a Twitch chat, or you may just be someone on Twitter, an anonymous user, what you do say to players and what you say to the community figures is actually something that they do end up inevitably reading and seeing, and it impacts people more than they probably expect it to. So that would be like my little, I don't know, my little preach maybe, in a way. So be nice. Be nice to people. And I sort of try to take that into my casting as well now. Like, I feel like a lot of the time previously in my career, I would kind of try and highlight the players that were playing poorly in any given game. And now I'm thinking like maybe that's not necessary. You know, maybe we just focus on who's doing well and what's the positives. And like, yeah, if someone's having a bad game, you might mention it once, but it's not something that you need to continue to harp on about. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
But yeah, in general, like you said, and to add on to that as well, I saw one of the an interview with JKS on HLTV with Sponge and the guys the other day, and one of the things that really spoke to me is when they asked him, "How did you like become insanely like so much better than you were even when people were saying you're good?" And there's one of the things that he said when he's like, "I just stopped caring. Like I just stopped giving a shit about like." And it's not in the way that he's like he's not passionate, but like you need to take a step back mentally in order to progress, I think. And it's a very fine line of being able to handle whatever's going on in your own head at that time as an individual. And I think that kind of really spoke to me as well. Like, yes, stop caring, but stop caring about like like losses and wins in general. Just play your fucking game, be a good teammate, be the best person you can be for your team and yourself, and good things will come. And you know what I mean? Stop caring in the point where it's like just fucking get over it, you know?
Mm. And so obviously after this, you took quite a bit of a step back from Counter-Strike for a little while. This was like around August 2019 when you left Complexity, and I assume around this time you sort of moved back to Australia. You know, I stopped obviously following what you were doing at that time because you had stopped playing competitively. You sort of seemed to take a step back. You know, I didn't see much from your Twitter or anything like that. But was there like a reset period for you? Like, did you obviously decide then you wanted to move away from the US and come back to Australia? Because I know that that was something that you had even mentioned in your twitlonger that you were considering coming back to Australia.
Yeah, it was a complete mental reset after Complexity. I really, really took into account what happened and the way that why I've gotten to where I have, and most of it is because of I've focused on positives, not negatives. And I initially wanted to stay in North America, but at that specific time, I was running out of time to stay in Toronto. And what happened was, excuse me, I I got a couple of offers from teams that would have been in Pro League the next season. Like probably the most significant offer that I got was from Chaos when it was Steel and I think Vanity, Ben Leet, and stuff like that. Anyway, so the reason why I declined that offer was because like I was gonna be the main AWPer for that team, but I just don't not want to play a major. Like it sucks because Steel is an insanely good in-game leader, and I think we would have been a good team. But I felt like if I'm not here for major and stickers and the most important events of the year, then it's just not right. So I had other opportunities as well, but then I saw that Order were eventually, I think they were making a replacement, and I actually approached Order and said, look, if I come back to Australia, what are the odds of me playing with you guys and stuff like that? And obviously I'm really good friends with EMAG and you still, so they said, yeah, if you come back, like we'll trial you. And at that time, Hats was about to join Renegades. So I thought about it. I thought about it really, really hard. I could have stayed in Toronto and grinded FPL and made 3 times the amount of money I'm making now if I wanted to. But it wasn't about that. It was about wanting to be comfortable and also transitioning into a period of my life that is more serious. So I decided to fast track everything, move back to Australia, get married, get my wife her visa, and actually come and live here together. You know, so that was all part of it, and it was all something that I looked into, and I said, you know, I think it's about time I settle down a little bit more and just be a little bit more comfortable. You know.
Oh. Was that like always the long-term prospect? Like obviously when you moved over to North America, you'd have been thinking short-term, maybe within the next 5 years I'll play North American Counter-Strike. But was the long-term prospect always that I want to continue to live in Australia, just like outside of CS, just your normal life?
Yeah, yeah. Outside of CS, eventually always move back to Australia. get a house here. Like this is my Melbourne is my hometown, and I don't think I'd ever want to live except for Vegas. I'd probably live in Vegas permanently. But other than that, it's Melbourne is my hometown, and this is where I'll be staying.
Sure. Okay, that seems fair enough. I think that's pretty reasonable given how good the quality of living is in Australia. But let's talk about Order. You know, you talked about how you sort of reached out to them. And initially, when you joined Order, the announcement that went out was that you were quote unquote filling in. So what was that all about? Was that like a trial period sort of time?
Um, yeah, I wouldn't say like I think the organization just said that just to like see what I think that they were kind of worried about like because of what happened with me in Complexity. But I said to them, I'm like, look, if you have any questions about like not only that because I was out of the contract at that point, so obviously I got removed. I don't have my contract anymore, so I can talk about these type of things now to other teams. And I said, look, if you have any questions about what happened towards the end, why I did what I did, what I was going through, what the team was going through, the mentality behind everything, let me know. Um, and EMAG basically said to me, he's like, bro, we're not worried about that. Like, just yeah, playing, we're just gonna get you. So I think the filling in thing was just like I was always gonna join. I think I was always gonna join.
Yeah, okay. So was there ever a thought process about the fact that you weren't necessarily joining the best AU team? You know, because at the time, current Renegades, has been head and shoulders above Oceanic Counter-Strike for quite a long time. So you coming back from North America should be the kind of player that would be like, you know, I want to have first dibs on whatever team I can come back into. So did you ever think about like, did it seem like a detriment to you to join the second best team or potentially even at the time the third best team in AU?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I was actually curious as to why they wouldn't get me, but again, that's my own ego talking. I wasn't anywhere near as good as I was in my previous teams towards the end of Complexity, so I think it makes sense that they could probably see that Rickeh's on a downwards trajectory, and we're probably better picking up an up and coming player from Australia instead. So I can understand that, but I did kind of expect to just like join Renegades again or something like that. But at the same time, um, I was happy to join Order because not like second best or third best or anything. Like I knew that I would get along with those guys, and I have a couple of really good friends in that team.
Hmm.
So I was, if I still made the decision to come back and join Order, regardless of any of that stuff. Yeah.
Sure. And what was the AU community sentiment around this? Because we know that the North American community seemed to be quite happy that you were out of Complexity. They were like, fuck Rickeh. But what did the Australian community think about Rickeh coming back to AU?
Um, I didn't really read into it too much. I tried to stay away from it from the most part. Maybe you know a little bit more than I do, but from the perspective I got was he's going to come back and dominate, and because it's just the Australian scene, and that just
Yeah,
is what it is.
I think that's always the expectation for teams from overseas that they should come back and be able to perform. But I think people were more so just kind of keen to see you back in Australia and see how you would perform. That's always to me, that is like the storyline when I see a player coming back. Same with like Ustillo and Yam. It's always been like, okay, well, they've had all this time overseas. What are they going to be able to do now in the Oceanic region? So we'll talk about a couple of the more important results of your career in Order, and then we'll wrap this one up because there's not too much. We're pretty much catching up to the current day.
Yeah, we've definitely covered a lot. That's
Covered
for
a
sure.
lot in the 3 hours so far. So what do we want to talk about? Asia Minor Qualifier, right? You take second place at this Asia Minor Qualifier, which already instantly puts you into the Asia Minor. But then obviously we know coronavirus happened. So this has sort of changed the landscape of Counter-Strike. So I guess the main question for me about this is like how do you sort of feel like you're meshing with the Order team at that point in time? You know, when you've just joined, taken second place, it seems like things must be going along pretty nicely. You know, being able to qualify for the minor must be the initial goal, if not to obviously beat Renegades.
Yeah, the main thing for us is just like focusing on because there was no overseas opportunities at the time, and because Corona happened, our main focus now is beating Renegades and making their life as hard as possible in the best in like saying it in the best way possible. You know, so I we were happy with the results coming in. I think when we lost against Avant like 2 times in a row, we realized fuck, we need to really take a step back, realize what's going on here. But the team environment in Order is, I'd like to compare it to Rogue. Like it's just such a good environment, and again, hindsight's a fucking bitch, but focusing on the positives is so much better than focusing on the negatives, even especially when you're trying to improve. Like yes, you can be constructive, but just being outright negative, like it's just not good. And the teams that Rogue and um, Rogue, CLG, and Order specifically have been really good at doing this, and just in general, like the environment's great. So regardless of results, I think we're in a good spot right now. We're still, I think, Renegades still have definitely more experience, and they're a little bit better at playing the mid-round situations than us. But we've been doing so much work in these past couple of months that I don't see them being really too much further ahead than us now. So I'm really looking forward to this tournament on the weekend. Actually, in a couple of days, we'll see
Yep.
what happens. So
Yeah, I'm not sure when I'm going to actually release this video, either on Thursday or Saturday. So you may actually be playing in that tournament when this video releases. But for now, I do want to touch on some of those results. The most interesting one for me was the Road to Rio Grand Final, which is where you were up on the second map. You were up 1-0. You won the first map. You're up second map. I think it was 12-3 on Inferno. And then Renegades goes on to then win that series. So do you want to sort of walk me through that one, even though it may be a bit of a painful memory?
So I think that's just an entire throw on our part. Like you can say you can give so many excuses like as experience as this and that, but we just fucking threw. Like we played the second half like so bad, and it showed that we weren't playing to try and win that game anymore. We're playing to stop them fucking running into us and just destroying us. That was our event to win. That was such an important event to win. Also, like the RMR, we'd be ahead on RMR right now. So that kind of killed us inside, but not to the point where for example, my mentality in Renegades 4 years ago, where I'm like, fuck, that was actually pathetic. Like my team shit. What am I doing? Like, we suck. Like it's more like, all right, it happened. Like everybody relax, go back to practice, and do what we have to do to fucking beat them next time.
Yep.
And that's just basically how it was. Like, yes, people were upset, but literally 10 minutes after that loss, we're all laughing again. Like, we instantly had a discussion about it. It's like everything's all good instantly.
Yeah, I mean, I remember we did those sort of post-game interviews with you guys. I can't remember if we did a post-game interview after the grand final of Road to Rio. That seems like a pretty harsh thing to do. I can't remember if it was with you or with Alistair, but I do seem to
Might have
recall
been with
doing one.
Ali.
Yeah.
Wasn't with me. It might have been with Ali.
Yeah, I seem to recall doing one where you guys, whoever we spoke to, just it seemed like, yeah, like that was shit, but we'll kind of get over it. So it didn't seem to have affected the team all that much. You also mentioned the losses to Avant. You lost a couple of times in Dreamhack Spring to Avant, I think, from memory. There's also the ANZ Champs loss at that grand final as well, although we haven't really spoken about ANZ Champs all that much. But there was this sort of community sentiment that Avant was a better team than Order right up until the ESL Pro League Season 12 qualifier. So did you, going into that event, sort of feel that maybe the community was wrong, that you sort of felt that Order was maybe a better team, or you were at least on par with Avant? What did you think about that sort of community sentiment?
This one I can maybe be a little bit cocky about. I think that we always should be beating Avant. That being said, I don't think it's entirely true, but in my personal opinion, I think we should always be beating them. But again, like Order, Avant, Renegades, and Ground Zero and Chiefs, they can all beat each other on any given time, and even Rooster can have some like big upsets now. So it's unrealistic to think that we should be beating them all the time. It's just my own cocky self saying like we shouldn't be losing to these players. But now that they made a replacement and Ofnu is in Chiefs, and who did Avant get?
It's not announced yet, so let's not say. But I think most people who have been following the ANZ scene probably can figure it out. Yeah.
Wait, is the Chiefs one announced?
The Chiefs one, I think the Chiefs one is announced, but I think the Avant one is not. But to be honest, by the time this video goes out, it's probably going to be announced because you guys will be playing in DreamHack Masters. So anyway, it doesn't really matter. There was that replacement, and yeah, they've made that roster change. And what was interesting as well is obviously the Pro League qualifier. Now, this event was the one where everyone thought that Avant should win. Avant wins in the upper bracket, and you go into that grand final. You're down 1-0 because of the map advantage, and you win that. So was this is, well, at least from my perspective, this is where Order sort of eclipsed Avant a little bit, but this is certainly where the community sentiment sort of turned around for you guys. But did this have any impact on the team in general, like internally?
Going into the tournament, being down 1 for the map advantage, we were pissed. We were like, we've had enough of this fucking team, dude. Like, how are we losing? Let's just shit on them. And that's the mentality that we went into with, and we've kind of kept that throughout, like even beforehand. But we we were like, yeah, we were just pissed off because like we shouldn't we should have closer games against Avant. And going back to the RMR tournament with Renegades, I think the reason it didn't affect us so much is because we know we actually destroyed them, except after the 12-3. Like
Mhm.
after that 12-3 half, everything went down. So that was our series to win, and I think that played a big part in not being so down about it also.
Do you think Avant sort of mental boomed in that grand final, the
Yeah, I think
qualifier?
I think they're a very momentum-based team in my opinion. I think uh again like I've played with a couple of players in that team before, and obviously it was many years ago, but I know that like some people can get like in a different state of mind, whether it's the same with like any other team. Like if you're losing, if you're down like 6-1, 7-1, obviously there's going to be a different type of feeling mentally than if you're up 7-1, right?
Sure.
And I think that the experience of those players might affect them a little bit more than maybe some of our players. So that's just my opinion. I don't know if that's like that now, and
Mm.
I don't know what happened in order for them to make the change that they did. But obviously something happened, and I just think that yeah, in my opinion, it affects people. They get affected a little bit more by losing. So if we start off good against Avant, I don't think they have a chance. That's why I
Sure.
say that basically.
I mean, that's not necessarily like 100% the case. That's obviously your opinion. And as you've
Yes.
shown even in this interview, like your mentality toward the game can change quite significantly. So maybe things have changed since then. But either way,
You
the
would hope
result
so, at least.
the
You'd hope,
result is
yeah.
as it stands. Um, the final question for the Pro League qualifier then is do you sort of feel like that result is worth more like rep almost than some of the other ones? Like you obviously didn't manage to perform in DreamHack Spring compared to Avant, but that didn't have an international qualifier attached. So like I'm obviously being a caster quite interested in ranking teams and building these storylines and saying like who's better than who, and that's kind of like the whole job, right? So in your opinion as a player, what event is worth more weighting in terms of that kind of ranking if you were to have to make a ranking? Do you think the one that has the international qualifier attached, like ESL Pro League Season 12, is worth more than both ANZ Champs and DreamHack Masters Spring combined?
Yeah, because it has the international qualifier attached to it, yes, it's definitely worth more. But at the same time, like everybody's always going to say, if you win an Australian tournament, doesn't matter, didn't have anything attached to it. It's like, why did we beat Renegades in the split one of ESL and Z? Maybe there wasn't as much on the line. It tends to have that thing behind it, you know.
Connotation,
So
maybe.
yeah, so it's just at the end of the day, they are more important, but if you need to be able to kind of mentally block that in order to be consistent, because if you're playing in tournaments and playing against teams based on how important the tournament is or how worth it is it for you, if like does it really matter if you win? It's never going to be You're never going to be at optimum efficiency as a team if you're thinking that way, and that's something that we've been working on in order as a team also, like how important tournaments are depending on what we're playing. Like it doesn't matter who we're playing or what tournament it is. We always have to play the exact same way that we want to play, and we need to have the same mentality going into every tournament. So yeah.
Okay, so that's more or less the end of your career up to this point. Like, I think that was pretty much the last major tournament that you've played in. There has been about a couple of weeks to a month of player break now as well, so you're just coming off of that and you're going to go and play in DreamHack Masters Summer. I think you guys are also in ESL 1 Cologne, that ANZ component of that as well. So hopefully those two tournaments go well for you. I think we're moving into a pretty interesting period of Australian Counter-Strike, and before I do wrap this interview up, I have a few more sort of bonus questions, as I always do. So we'll just quickly jump through these ones before I let you go. And these are totally like unrelated necessarily to your career because I couldn't find a way to kind of work them into the general discussion. But the first question is, do you have any like advice for players who want to get out of AU and play in North America, for example? Or is that not a realistic dream at the moment, or is it a realistic dream? What's your whole sort of take on this situation?
Because of COVID now, it's not realistic. But after all this shit is over, like I think in order to kind of do what I did, you need to be prepared before you do it. Because I jumped into this whole thing like being so unbelievably unprepared that look what happened, you know. So I think it's uh, definitely achievable. You just need to be prepared, whether it be mental preparation, like you know what I mean. It's hard to say, man. It's really
You
hard
need
to
to be
say.
mature, maybe?
Yeah, you need to be mature. That's 100%. That's a good one. It's and in general, like there's there's a lot of players that have been offered to go overseas and they've declined the offer because they're comfortable here. Like I can give you in a couple of examples. I'm not going to name too many names, but I'm gonna uh, I'm gonna talk about JKS because he's the only person that people know has been offered to join teams like Liquid and maybe Optic back in the day and other teams. But he was comfortable being in an Australian team and he's comfortable doing what he's doing now, even though it would have progressed his career, like it would have fast tracked his career a lot more, he did not want to do it. So it depends on the individual. If you're capable of taking that step, maybe you have no choice. Maybe sometimes you have no choice, like I did, right? But if you're um, if you're at that point in your career, like it depends on the individual whether you want to do it or not. I know there is an Australian player or two that has been offered really, really big time stuff in NA, and they would rather stay in Australia and play, which to me is really fucking stupid. But again, like it's all about it's not so much about being in a certain place. It's just about if you're comfortable mentally and if you're prepared to do that, you know?
Hard to say that it's the right decision or the wrong decision when you are not the
Yeah.
individual that it's affected. Because, you know, for me, I could be like, yeah, if I got an invite to go over to Europe and cast Counter-Strike, like, obviously that's a no-brainer. But, you know, you may not know my personal circumstance in that there's a reason I want to stay in ANZ or whatever, for example. But that's never happened. So that's totally beside the point. The second question then is, for players coming back from North America or whatever, similar to yourself and Yam and Rickeh, Yam and Ustillo, obviously, there are always these storylines. We sort of briefly touched on this, that you should come back to ANZ and dominate, and you know that you should be like this godlike player or whatever. But do you think that there is, you know, do you think that there's any sort of legitimacy to that claim? Do you think you should come back and just genuinely be better than everyone else, or is that maybe a little bit of an overblown kind of a prospect?
It's a little bit overblown, I think, but you should be able to come back and perform like pretty fucking well, like at least a lot better than you were doing in North America, I'd say. But again, it kind of depends on the roles because like Ustillo, for example, he takes all the roles that nobody wants to do, and he's fucking good at it. Also, like he's a great entry fragger, and he takes all the shit roles, and he still performs under those roles. So again, it depends on the roles that you take in the team because that's really going to affect your performance as well. But you're doing something so important for the team that if the team is performing, it does not matter at the end of the day. So yeah, it's a little bit blown out of proportion because there is players that take certain roles that doesn't enable them to frag as much. It's just the way it is in Counter-Strike.
Yep, makes sense. What's your biggest career regret?
Biggest career regret. The twitlonger.
Okay.
The twitlonger and things, and I'd say to add on to that, things not going in Renegades the way um, that they should have gone. Because I feel like, and this again, this is another ego thing coming out, but bro, I'm fucking a better AWPer than Gratisfaction, all right? So I could have easily been on that 100 Thieves lineup. But again, my wife's going to be pissed off because if I say I should have taken that career path, I would have never met her. I would have never been married. I would have never been where I am now. So it's like a two-edged sword, you know?
Everything happens for a reason, so they say.
Yeah.
All right, so then we would move on to some more positive questions. And these are the last two that I've got for you, and they're both around teammates. So who's your favorite teammate of all time? Like, who's the best player that you've ever played with? Or maybe not necessarily the best player, but who have you enjoyed playing with the most as an individual player?
There isn't like one that stands out over, but I can give you a very quick list.
Sure.
Hiko, Nothing, Stanislaw, Sick, Cadian, all the guys
All
in
the road
Rogue.
guys.
Yeah, all the road guys. Emag, Ustillo, top guys. Ali and Matt, I've only just met them like 5-6 months ago. Already really good mates with those guys, top blokes. But I enjoy playing with a lot of people. You did say one guy. Who's my favorite? Okay.
Yeah, just give me one then. One friend above the rest.
My favorite person to play with that I had the most.
You did say Hiko first, so that would make me assume he was the first one that came to your mind.
He's a funny motherfucker, that guy. Yeah, Hiko. I'm gonna say Hiko.
All right, cool. There we go. And I'm sure Hiko is, like, if I asked a bunch of other players their favorite teammate, I think some other players probably would say Hiko as well, based on the interviews that I've seen from, even for example, like Simple, right? I think they had a really good relationship as well. So maybe Hiko's just that kind of guy. Anyway, the last question then is, if there was one player that you haven't played with in your entire history of Counter-Strike that you wanted to play with, who would that be?
One player that I would want to play with. I mean, you could just go ahead and say Zywoo is simple, but I think more realistically, a person that I'd want to play with again is Stanislaw. Yeah, Stanislaw and Ethan. Like, I've experienced what those guys are capable of, and I would love to play with those guys again. Mainly, yeah, pretty much those guys.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll leave it there then for In Retrospect with Rickeh. It's been great to have you on. I know that you are trying to get your stream going and, you're doing that at the moment. So I'll give you the opportunity here to do a few shout outs, So whatever you want to say, this is your opportunity for final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I'd just like to shout out to Order specifically for doing what they're doing for us. Like, again, really, really good organization in Australia. Our sponsors, again, Logitech, Puma, Alienware, Optus, and everything is just like really, really good at the moment in terms of streaming. Man, it's tiring streaming after practice. We'll see what we're doing with that. I'm not 100%. I don't really know if I can do it without being extremely fatigued. But yeah, just in general, like, thanks to everybody who follows this and also follows me as well. And yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's been great to have you. Where can people find you? I know that your Twitter's there. It's at Rickeh, but what's your Twitch stream as well, if anyone's interested?
Twitch stream is Rickeh AUS, Rickeh Oz.
Okay, cool. All right, well, that's the end of In Retrospect with Rickeh. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you support things, put a comment in the channel, whatever. Like the video. Follow me on Twitter at ElfishGuy. I do have a Patreon as well. There's not that many Patreons, but man's trying to grind. So if you enjoy this content, please feel free to throw a couple of bucks my way. That would be much appreciated. Otherwise, hope to see you in the next episode. Don't know who it's going to be, but I'm looking forward to it.
Time.